Welcome to the Podkey Summary of United Armenia. Today's story is about an idea that's much bigger than the borders of modern Armenia. United Armenia, sometimes called Greater Armenia. It pulls together memory, genocide, lost homelands, legal arguments, and the very raw aftermath of the Karabakh Wars. And what makes it especially striking is the gap between symbolism and practicality. For many Armenians, these places carry enormous emotional and historical weight, even when the chances of actually redrawing borders feel close to non-existent. In its classic nationalist form, United Armenia is the vision of reuniting territories associated with the historic Armenian homeland. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation has been the clearest and most consistent advocate, with a map that includes today's Republic of Armenia, Western Armenia and Eastern Turkey, Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, Nakhchivan, and Javakheti in southern Georgia. Put together, that's described as roughly 182,000 square kilometers, while the current Armenian Republic is only a small fraction of that, something like 10 to 15% of the broader homeland imagined by advocates. If there's one symbol that carries this whole vision, it's Mount Ararat. It's in Turkey, but for Armenians, it's everywhere in the national imagination, a reminder of continuity after communities were destroyed or scattered in the early 20th century. The Armenian genocide sits right at the center of the moral logic here. The account we're working from says about 1.5 million Armenians were killed in 1915 and the years that followed, and that Ottoman policies effectively erased a millennia-old Armenian presence across much of Western Armenia. Turkey, as we know, officially rejects the genocide label. For many Armenian nationalist groups, genocide recognition is not just about naming the crime. It's tied to reparations, restitution of property, church and cultural heritage claims, and for some, possible territorial consequences too. That's exactly the connection Turkish officials reject most sharply, because they see any territorial framing as a direct threat to Turkey's sovereignty and territorial integrity. At the same time, Armenian public opinion has often supported making some kind of demand. One 2014 survey found around 80% of respondents in Armenia backed that in some form, even though many people also seem to regard actual territorial recovery as unrealistic. A lot of the legal argument revolves around the 1920 Treaty of Sèvres. Nationalist advocates treat it as the main formal basis for claims to Eastern Turkey. Woodrow Wilson's arbitral award proposed an Armenian-Turkish boundary that would have given Armenia around 100,000 square kilometers and access to the Mediterranean. The problem is that this settlement was never carried out. The Turkish War of Independence, the Sovietization of Armenia, and then the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne wiped out the Sèvres framework in practice. Even so, people like Ara Papian argue that Sèvres still has legal relevance, and they challenge the legitimacy of the Treaty of Kars, because it was signed by Soviet and Kemalist authorities they consider insufficiently legitimate. Armenian leaders have usually been more careful than the activists. Some commemorate Sèvres as an enduring historical right, but others, including former President Levon Ter-Petrosyan, have warned that actually demanding implementation would make Armenia look expansionist and hurt it diplomatically. Nagorno-Karabakh is where the idea of a larger Armenia stopped being only historical memory and became a live political project. Starting in 1988, Armenian demonstrators and the regional legislature pushed to move the Armenian-populated enclave from Soviet Azerbaijan to Soviet Armenia. That spiraled into pogroms, mass displacement, and eventually full-scale war. After the 1994 ceasefire, Armenian forces and the unrecognized Republic of Artsakh controlled Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding Azerbaijani districts, creating a de facto connection with Armenia. That control came with enormous human cost. Between 500,000 and 600,000 Azerbaijanis were displaced from areas captured by Armenian forces, while hundreds of thousands of Armenians and Azerbaijanis were uprooted elsewhere across the conflict zone. Then the whole picture flipped. After the 2020 war and Azerbaijan's offensive in September 2023, Azerbaijan retook the surrounding territories and then full control of Nagorno-Karabakh. Artsakh announced it would dissolve as of January 1, 2024, and nearly all of the region's Armenians fled to Armenia. So one of the most concrete pieces of the broader United Armenia imagination ended in collapse, and very recently. Two other places on the wider map tell very different stories. Javakheti in southern Georgia is unusual because it's still overwhelmingly Armenian populated in the accounts cited, around 95%, but Armenia has not made a territorial claim to it. Armenian organizations there have generally focused more on cultural rights or strong self-government within a federal Georgia. The region is isolated. Armenian is often more useful than Georgian in daily life, and there has been disputes over churches and language rights. Still, both Armenian and Georgian governments have mostly tried to keep things calm, because Armenia depends heavily on stable ties with Georgia. Geography can be a very persuasive diplomat. Nakhchivan is the opposite case. Armenians were once a significant minority there, but their share shrank from roughly 40% before World War I to about 1.4% by 1979, and the last few thousand left in 1988. For Armenians, the destruction of cultural sites there, especially the Julfa cemetery, became a powerful symbol of cultural erasure and of how historical narratives in the region are fought over not only with armies, but with memory and stone. There's also a more radical strand that goes beyond restoring lost Armenian regions and starts talking openly about expansion for security. The clearest example is the proposed Kura-Arax Republic, coined in 2016 by political scientist Levon Shurinyan and later adopted by the Sasna Tsrer movement. That vision would extend Armenian control toward the Kura River, including Nakhchivan and parts of western Azerbaijan. Supporters say natural boundaries there would be easier to defend, and that controlling railways and energy routes would strengthen Armenia and pressure Azerbaijan. Critics, including Levon Ter-Petrosyan, have called the whole thing a dangerous fairy tale that would confirm every accusation of Armenian expansionism. What made it more than just talk was the 2016 seizure of a police base in Yerevan by an armed group associated with Jirer Sefilian, and then the adoption of the Kura-Arax goal by its successor political party. That tension between maximalism and caution really runs through the whole subject. The ARF still formally calls for a free, independent, and united Armenia, and diaspora institutions, genocide advocacy groups, some parties, and former officials have backed parts of that agenda in different ways. But Armenia's governments have generally avoided making formal territorial claims against Turkey, even while leaving historical claims alive at the symbolic level. So you get leaders praising Wilson's award or calling Sèvres an important historical fact, without treating it as an active diplomatic program. Public opinion shows a similar split. Surveys have found much harder positions on Karabakh than on claims to eastern Turkey. In 2013, 77% definitely favored incorporating Nagorno-Karabakh into Armenia, and in 2017, 86.4% opposed territorial concessions in that conflict. Claims on Turkey seem to carry deep emotional force, but are more often treated as part of historical justice and identity than as a realistic plan for state policy. So United Armenia is not one simple demand. It's a mix of grief, law, symbolism, nationalism, and security thinking, with Karabakh showing both how powerful that vision can become and how brutally it can unravel. And maybe that's the central fact to keep in mind. Some maps live as policy, some live as memory, and in this case, the distance between the two is the whole story. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.